I want to talk about crisis theory today. I did so earlier, but I took in each of my videos a partial look at crisis theory, beginning with the idea that investment is directed toward an uncertain future and therefore has no guarantee of being appropriate for an economy. So I want to take a step back and note that back in the 1640s, William Harvey first discovered how blood circulates throughout the body. At first, he was neglected, and then by the 1660s, his view became accepted and highly influential. And it's no accident that today we talk about circulation of commodities or circulation of money, just as he spoke about the circulation of blood. Now, the idea of a medical body or medical theory being like economics is very interesting because both are based on the idea that you have a reciprocal theory, reciprocal system rather, based on balances. Where do these balances come from? Body through human body, even an animal body, is fine-tuned through millions of years of evolution so that these balances work quite well. In the economy, we have no such balance because there is no system to create these reciprocal movements. Now, ideally, in a textbook economics course, you'll see how supply and demand works and everything fits together. But this description is very imprecise and misleading. In fact, the economy is segmented. So not only do the firms have no way of knowing whether their investment is going to be appropriate, but the system is designed as a whole so that large parts of the system are also uncoordinated. Marx did this in the second volume of Capital, where he tried to show how you have two sectors of the economy, ideally one producing consumer goods and one producing investment goods. And the demand for the goods that the consumers purchase depends upon the employment and activity in the investment goods sector. Again, in a balanced economy, these two parts of the economy would reciprocate each other, and you would get a consistent circular flow, using the terminology of economics, that would be comparable to the type of blood flows that Harvey saw in looking at biological bodies. What Marx said is there's nothing in the system to regulate how the investment would proceed to be coordinated with consumption. Now, economists came up with an idea to describe the coordination. They said that if the economy slackened, there'd be more savings, and the savings would automatically lead to investment, and the investment would right the economy once again. Once Keynes wrote and showed how this type of theory was unwarranted, it becomes difficult for economists to describe how this coordination would exist. So economists turn to another kind of coordination, and that is they try to regulate the economy one way or another. In one of the earlier videos, I described how monetary and fiscal policy were used in order to correct deficiencies in the economy as a whole. The problem here was that the monetary and fiscal policies, in effect, tended to undermine the way that the economy ideally would work. So let's take a step back and talk about crises from another perspective, and that is Marx and many conservative economists saw a crisis as a way of eliminating some of the imbalances in the economy and making it work more efficiently. Now, for Marx, the economy operated on two different levels. One was a system of values in which the price system was somehow coordinating the economy so that the labor would be applied in the appropriate way. That is, there would be some rough coordination, not an equality, but a rough coordination between labor values and prices. What happens is, over time, these two worlds, the world of the prices and the world of the underlying labor values, become more and more delinked. And that delinkage means that the people making decisions in the economy are going to get incorrect feedback. Now, the way this delinkage occurs is through something that Marx called fictitious values. And these fictitious values were things that were values based on the expectation of future returns. And as these fictitious values become more and more ingrained in the economic system, the ability to function effectively diminishes. So what a crisis does is it eliminates the fictitious values, helping to make the economy work with a bit more coordination. In this way, crises are important in order for strengthening the economy in the long run. Over time, as the system becomes more and more fragile, then a crisis can occur of such magnitude that it shatters the system and the economy is ready to be reorganized on a different, in Marx's way, in Marx's vision, a socialist or communist organization. How do these fictitious values work? And where do they come from? You can see partially what's happening in the economy after the end of the Golden Age. There, as I mentioned before in one of the earlier videos, you had a system in which increasingly wealth and income was directed up to the richest people in the country, in the world. And demand for consumer goods was made possible only through the massive credit creation that allowed people to purchase much more than they could afford. This credit, in effect, turned into fictitious capital, and labor was applied in places where it was inappropriate. This became very obvious in the housing sector, and essentially you had a crisis. But here you had a different kind of crisis, because monetary and fiscal policy were capable of preventing the economy from falling apart. And yet, the economic strength of the economy is being sapped further and further. Now, we know that these crises can last a long time. The crisis in the late 19th century, you could count from 1873 on into the early 1890s. There were some interruptions, a few healthy episodes, but for the most part, it was not a healthy time for the economy, even though it grew very quickly. As I mentioned in the earlier video, profits were sagging, but technology was making output increase. Then again, in the 1930s, despite the New Deal, the economy was recovering modestly well, but then in 1937, before the economy had time to recover, the political mood shifted and the government pulled back. And as a result, the economy slipped back into a depression until World War II. So here we don't have the strong support for the economy that you had in the Depression. Instead, you had a fairly weak and ineffectual stimulus program accompanied by massive tax cuts. And the thing is showing no signs of recovery. In fact, the crisis looked at, and from a global perspective, looks like it may get even deeper. So what then does this tell us about what happened? You had a crisis, namely the falling profits in the golden age. Then you had a reorganization, a neoliberalization of the economy, and that helped to restore profits, but it did so only by creating more fictitious value, and that creates a new crisis. So that the system never has given any indication that on its own it's able to correct itself. Now there are those people that say, well, if you let the whole thing go, like Andrew Mellon during the Great Depression, when he's talked about liquidate the farmers, liquidate labor, went on a whole list. The economy could recover, or the shock could be so great, either politically or economically, that you would have a revolutionary change, not necessarily uprising, but the whole political atmosphere would change in such a way that the economy would have to reorganize into something entirely different. This gets me to the final point, to say there is no single crisis theory. What happens is you have a crisis, the leaders will try to reorganize in one way or another, the reorganization creates another problem, and that leads to a new crisis, and that creates another problem. And until you do have a massive shakeout, the strength of the economy will be sapped, and something new will have to come. Now it can come either through a total reorganization, or it can come as the United States becomes, like many other empires of the past, turning into a relatively minor player, while new economies, perhaps in Asia, take over the leadership of the world capitalist market. But in any case, what we have today is something that offers little hope of a healthy recovery. So anyway, thank you very much. And the last 3 videos were on YouTube. The 2 previous was on something called Ustream, and the U was just the letter U. So USTREAM.com. And I would appreciate hearing from you and knowing if you find these things useful or not. So thank you very much, and goodbye.